Good evening. How are you all? You good? Yeah, good night, isn't it? Yeah, this is a great turnout. Appreciate it. Hi, I'm Mark Epley. I'm Interim Keys Dean of Business Administration here at Marquette University. I'm delighted to welcome you to After Hours. This is the kickoff event for the Kohler Center for Entrepreneurship's Entrepreneurship Week. Tonight's event features a keynote speaker, Steve Ausnit, pioneer of Ziploc and business entrepreneur for over 6 decades with over 2 patents in just the last 6 years alone. Although I'm not going to go any further into that, I'll ask Saskia Selick to come up here and introduce him in a few minutes. One of the things we try to do here in the College of Business Administration is a series of things within entrepreneurship and economics. And one of the things that's worth mentioning, especially Saskia's interest in economics and entrepreneurship, and I'll introduce her in a moment, like I say, is we actually run a program called Applied Global Business Leaders. And what we do with that program is a faculty member and several students go out to different countries to assist locals in creating business opportunities. They've gone to 5 different countries, including the Dominican Republic, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and India. And the goal, like I say, is to assist these individuals with business problems in underserved countries. To date, over 115 of our students have gone on these trips globally. And one of the recent projects included an opportunity where a handful of students and a faculty member helped a group of 3 women in Honduras market linens. These 3 women were fired from their jobs because they proved to be HIV positive. So there's some really good social justice as part of that. I should also make a few mentions of the Kohler Center for Entrepreneurship and the Business College at Marquette University. The College of Business is very committed to entrepreneurship, and over the past 6 years we've had over 100 graduates in the entrepreneurship program. And several have gone on directly into several different entrepreneurial ventures and have been very successful with that. Additionally, for those of you who are not business majors, you can also get a minor in entrepreneurship, and that program is growing nicely over the last several years. In short, entrepreneurialism has captured the imagination of some of the best and brightest minds here at Marquette University and at many other institutions nationally. And I think we're going to have some great comments over here by our guest lecturer that will help fuel that entrepreneurial spirit here at Marquette University. Tonight's After Hours presentation, like I say, is the first installment of several After Hours speaker series. And we'll have 3 different speaker series with this After Hours program. The next one will be in February, and then another one in April, which is part of our next business model competition. Lastly, I would like to give a shout out to the Coleman Foundation of Chicago for their support in tonight's event. The Komen Foundation is a private, independent foundation established in Illinois in 1951 by Dorothy and Stetson Coleman. There you go. What did the Colemans do to set this up, or why do they have entrepreneurship as their focus? The Colemans were successful entrepreneurs who were best known in the Chicagoland for their Fannie Mae candies, which is kind of fun. So now for my primary purpose tonight, which is simply to introduce Saskia Selick. Saskia is Steve Ausnit's granddaughter. She's a junior with majors in entrepreneurship and economics. She is vice president of Youth Empowered Struggle, which is the largest immigrants' rights organization in Wisconsin. She's also a member of Delta Sigma Pi, the business fraternity here at Marquette, and comes to us from Hoboken, New Jersey. In chatting with Saskia, I can't imagine how meaningful it might be to be introducing your grandfather at your father's alma mater. So please welcome your fellow student leader, Saskia Selick, to the stage. Saskia.
So the last time I gave a speech on behalf of my grandfather, it was in Romanian. So I figure no matter how badly I mess up tonight, it cannot compare to my butchering of the Romanian language. So I have a lot of good stories about my grandfather. And it's funny because my favorite story is actually his least favorite story. And I'd like to preface this story by saying that my grandfather is an incredibly patient man. This would be evident to anyone familiar with the women in his life, and I include only my mother and myself in that statement. My grandmother is a saint. But in my entire life, my grandfather has only ever gotten mad at me once. And I'll save everyone the suspense. I totally deserved it. I was 10, and we were spending the weekend together. And before leaving, my mother had made my grandfather promise to quiz me on my multiplication times tables. So naturally, I'd been stalling all weekend, the typical, "But Poppy, we don't really need to study." But my grandfather is a man of his word, and there are only so many excuses one 10-year-old can think of. So the first question he asked me was a really tough one, 7 times 8. And for those of you trying to calculate it right now, the answer is 56. So I stand by that first blank stare. But when I blanked out on 4 times 4, my grandfather got a little frustrated. And he looked me right in the eyes and with a relatively powerful voice said, "Saskia, you are so good at so many things, and you can do better than this." It was one of the most important things anyone had ever said to me. However, because I was 10, instead of communicating my understanding of the statement, I burst out crying. And I have let my grandfather feel guilty about this for over a decade. But I think that now is as good a time as any to come clean, because even then, I knew he was right. Not only could I do better, but I should. As any introductory Marquette philosophy class will teach you, excellence is to do one's duty well. And in that moment, it was my duty to know my times tables. Now, my grandfather and I disagree on a lot of things: politics, an appropriate nail polish color, the factor of 7 times 8. But one of the things we've always agreed on is business. He always told me the entrepreneurial spirit was something that ran in my veins. And though I had my struggles in school, he never doubted me. If anyone had told me in high school that I would be taking an accounting class here at Marquette, I would have laughed at them. And I think that my math teachers would have laughed at them as well. I don't know how many of you out there have had to take an accounting class at Marquette, but those things are tough. You will leave a piece of your soul in that exam room. So growing up, our family motto was always be proud of where you come from. Now, I'm from New Jersey, so some of you may think that's hard to do, but we've got a couple things going for us. We got Springsteen, Sinatra, cheetah print, those rough A's. You know what I'm talking about. But where I come from goes further back than New Jersey. I come from decades of hard work and perseverance, from the endless trials and tribulations that come with immigrating to America, to the successes and failures of starting a business. I come from an entrepreneurial spirit, which started in the steel mills of Romania, trickled down through Mini-Grip, and is a force yet to be stopped. My grandfather was a man who was able to succeed in American business, but he never forgot where he came from. For decades, he's reinvested in his home country of Romania, supporting education and business. His loyalty and dedication have set the foundation for who I am today. Marquette tells us to be the difference. Well, my grandfather is the difference. So without further ado, it's my honor to present Steve Ausnit.
Well, if any of you are ever going to give a speech and you're lucky enough to have a lovely granddaughter like mine, be sure she gives the introduction. I want to thank the Kohler Center for inviting me here. And while I haven't had the pleasure of attending Marquette, which is known for its academic excellence, its basketball team, and I gather the best chili in the United States, or maybe in this planet or the planetary system. I do have a connection, obviously my granddaughter and my son-in-law who graduated from this university. I've been asked to tell you the history of the plastic zipper and zipper bag, which you all know as Ziploc, the Ziploc bag. Actually, there is much more to it than that. It's a story of 3 companies, intertwined companies, FlexiGrip, Mini-Grip, and Zip-Pack. And the Ziploc bag, in a way, was a derivative of one of these companies, or two of these companies. It all started back in 1951. Let me take you for a moment back then to give you the flavor of the time. That was a time when a cup of coffee was a nickel, public transportation was a nickel or a dime. You want to make a phone call, you use the dial phone. The workers' maximum wage, or the minimum wage was under $1. That was a time when an iPod, an iPad, a personal computer, stuff of science fiction. I don't even think that the science fiction magazines had thought of it at that time. Anyhow, back then, one day a friend of our family came to us to show us this newfangled device. Go back on my family a minute. My father was a sort of super entrepreneur. He created one of the steel complexes in Romania, and he ran the other one. He was known as the Steel King of Romania. Anyhow, this friend shows us this two plastic strips, and you open them close with a slider. You could even press them together. No teeth to catch or snag, dust-proof closure, moisture-proof, and best of all, you could make it by the mile. You extruded it, and it was easy to produce, and it was very, very intriguing. So we said, well, let's look into it further. Let's find out more about it. And sure enough, what they said, it was true. You could extrude it. We could figure out the price from this amount of plastic that went into it and the speed of the extrusion. It did have some patent applications to cover it, though frankly, if I knew then what I know now about patents, I would have had my doubt about the value of those patents they issued, but they weren't great. The material was readily available. Everything looked pretty good. So my father said to me, well, go out and see what kind of a market we have for this product. My degree was in engineering. I knew nothing about commerce. I was just out of the army and didn't relish the job, but he said, well, for goodness sake, see what people who are making plastic garment bags or plastic pillow covers or mattress covers or plastic raincoats, plastic toilet kits, any plastic product that uses a zipper. So dutifully, I put together a list and went out to see these companies, and they all said, yeah, very interesting, we like it, but one of the first questions, what's the price? And we had figured out the price, and it was around 20% below the metal zipper. So with a pretty good report, we came back and we had a very simple business plan, more of a seat of the pants plan, I would say, because we hadn't paid attention to a lot of details and we made a lot of assumptions. But it was simple. We would subcontract the making and producing of the zipper. We would put it on spools, and we would then sell these to the various customers at the various companies out there. No overheads to speak of, no factory, nice profit. Really looked good. Looked like, so you might say, we had the cat's whiskers. Well, we went ahead and we bought the rights to this plastic zipper for the United States and Canada, and we started a company called FlexiGrip to make it. Well, that's when we found out that the cat had no whiskers, because at that point in time, all of a sudden, we found out a lot of other things. Number one, the Korean War had ended. This was not our fault, of course, but the zipper price had plummeted. We were now 10% higher instead of 20% lower. So you now had a much tougher selling job to do. To make things worse, the products which we had hoped the zipper to work on didn't pan out so well. There were all kinds of problems with it. And on top of that, there were a few minor details, like we had planned to make it out of a PVC, polyvinyl chloride. What we forgot, or what we didn't check on, was that PVC, when it gets cold, gets very stiff. So all of a sudden you had a zipper that you couldn't open and close. And when it got very hot, it got very soft. So all of a sudden you had a zipper that had very little strength. There were quite a few of these problems that arose, and at one point we really were not quite desperate, but we wanted to get out. And we were looking for a company that might buy us out. And my father knew Colonel Bain, who was the president of IT&T, and that was International Telephone and Telegraph, which in those days was just that. It wasn't a conglomerate. But they made plastic sheathing for their wiring. They had a couple of small subsidiaries. It might be a good fit, and it was. And Colonel Bain liked it, and they were prepared to buy it for at least the price that we paid. But he said, you know, it's a public company, and we really have to make a market study before we can go ahead. And so they picked a company to make this market study. And they did it, and they came back with a report and said, well, it's a nice little business, but it'll never, ever do more than $1 million. To be fair, $1 million today would be like $7 or $8 million today. So the deal fell through, obviously. And as an aside, many, many years later, I found that report, and I looked up and saw that that marketing company still existed. So I wrote him a letter, and I thanked him for screwing up the deal. They didn't have a sense of humor because they never responded. By this time, it became apparent that we had to make the zipper ourselves. The quality of the subcontractors was poor. There were problems with the spools. So we went ahead and we rented a small space, 5,000 square feet in Manhattan. We bought an extruder, and we started to make the product. And we found a couple of products on which it worked, but at this point, we still were losing money. So we had another idea. We thought, well, Life magazine was the magazine of the time. Everybody read it. And if we get a story in there, it would make it much easier for us to sell. It would open up to us to the general public, to manufacturers, and so on. And we got a public relations company, and they got a very nice story in Life magazine, and it didn't do a zilch for us. It didn't help us in any way whatsoever. But by now, one thing had become evident. The future of this plastic zipper was not on plastic products. It was in the packaging field. That was fine. The trouble was, to get into the packaging field, there were a few hurdles. First of these was that you couldn't use a PVC zipper. You had to use a polyethylene zipper. Polyethylene was the preferred material. Most of the film that was used for packaging was polyethylene. It also had advantages, and it was faster to extrude, and there was more feet per pound, so it was definitely the way to go. The trouble was that when we went to the resin companies who made it, they looked at our product and they said, well, yeah, but you know, you're not going to be able to do it, because in those days, this was long ago, they said those little teeth that hold the zipper together won't work in polyethylene. Not having any choice and not knowing any better, we decided we're going to have to try. And we did, and we tried, and finally we did succeed, and it was a very crude zipper, but it worked. The next problem was, if you go into the packaging market, you can't have a slider. If you use a slider, in those days where you had to thread the zipper through the slider, it was the cost of the slider, the cost of the manual labor, just wouldn't pan out. So we had to find a way, how do we open the zipper? Because we knew you could close it with your fingers, but how did you open it? Well, everybody knows that today, but in those days, it wasn't that obvious. So we came up with the idea, we will extrude a lip on one side of the interlocking elements, and when you peel that lip, it'll open the zipper, and it worked. Then the question was, what do we do about our trademark? We have no slider. There was no way of marking anything, so we came up with the idea of putting color on the lip and having this color line, which became our trademark. And incidentally, a trademark can be more valuable than a patent, because for one, it lasts forever as long as you renew it every 20 years. And it really puts your product aside. I mean, you think of Velcro, Kleenex, or any of these are great names. Of course, you have to be careful they don't become generic, because then you can lose your trademark. That's why it's always a Ziploc bag. Don't talk about a Ziploc, it's the Ziploc bag. The next problem was, how do we put the zipper on the film? There were no machines that made zipper bags. There were machines that made simple polyethylene bags, but nothing that made a zipper bag. So I went to the companies that made the bag machines and said, look, here's a great idea. Why don't you build one of these machines? You have all these companies you could sell it to. And they said, yeah, we like it. It's very nice. Just bring us a customer. We'll pay for the machine, and we'll build it. And I went to the customer, and I said, well, if you make these zipper bags where you can sell them, you can sell them into all these markets, pharmaceuticals and hardware and textiles. And they said, yeah, it's very nice, but bring us a machine and we'll do it. So you had this chicken and egg situation and went around and around till finally we found two companies who built their own machines. And they were held together by string and chewing gum, but they worked. They did make zipper bags, and we were able to, or the companies that we sold zipper to were able to customers, and we started to move ahead. One big problem still remained, and this probably most of you won't believe. People did not know how to open that bag. Believe me, that was the case. I'll give you an example. We at one point had persuaded Columbia Records to put their vinyl long-playing records in a plastic sleeve with our zipper. It had many advantages. It kept the record dust-proof and protected it. So at the final meeting with the market manager, when we were all set to go, price was right, everything was okay. He said, well, you know, I don't think that people know how to open this bag. And we said, well, come on, it's obvious, you know, you just do that. And he said, yeah, I know, I know because you told me. And he said, wait a minute. And he calls his secretary, and he hands her this zipper bag. Remember, the zipper is sealed, attached to the bag. And he said, open it. I just thought to myself, lady, please do the right thing. And she looks at it, and that's, the more she looks at it, the more my heart sank, because the next moment she tears the zipper right off the bag. And that was a sale. I mean, it was, and that problem haunted us actually for quite a while. The next thing was, okay, we're doing well now. We're making nice money. We're selling our zipper to these two companies. They're making the zipper bags and selling them. When I get a call from one of our associates in Europe, we had friends there who were doing the same thing. He said, Steve, you better watch out. There is another product which looks like a better mousetrap. And I said, well, what is it? He said, well, you know, there's a Japanese company called Saisan Nippon Sha who's made a bag where the lock and the film are made together. It's a better product, and you better try and get an exclusive license from them, because that's what we're doing. So we contacted Saisan, and we negotiated, and we got the exclusive license, and we got their patent rights. Now, mind you, at this point, let me say that patents became a very important part of our business, and without them, I don't know how we would have succeeded. Fortunately, at that time, we knew enough about patents, because the Japanese patent was not very good. It was very good from the point of view of what was in it, but the claims were lousy, and that's what is important in patent, the claims. What you claim is your idea. Anyhow, we negotiated a deal with them, and then we had a real big break. The Dow Chemical Company had seen our bag in Europe, but found out we owned the rights, and they came to us and said they wanted an exclusive license for the grocery trade, which was the supermarkets. And so we negotiated the exclusive license, and it had one very important factor. It had an inflation clause. No contract, long-term contract, should be without an inflation clause. Today, it doesn't make much difference, but if you think what happens over a period of years, of 20 years, or a life of a patent, or 15, it can make a hell of a difference. We signed the deal with them, and it took them about 2 years to get going, and that's where the Ziploc bag comes from. Dow Chemical put across what we call the miniature bag they called the Ziploc bag. And at that time, our growth, we had just moved in, our new plant, and our growth started to follow in the Minigrip product. As an aside, I remember we had two companies, Minigrip and Flexigrip. Minigrip was making the zipper bags, and Flexigrip was making the zipper. And I had a gentleman work for me. He was kind of my man of all seasons, and we were going to merge the companies. And I said, he said, "What are you going to call it?" I said, "Well, obviously Minigrip, because that's where the growth is." He said, "Steve, you're wrong. You should stick with the original name Flexigrip." I said, "Come on, Otto, you know, that's not where the growth is." He said, "Okay, Steve, you'll see one day you'll be wrong. Just keep that in mind for later." And so we went ahead, and things were going quite nicely when another problem arose. One of our customers from the West Coast calls us and said, "Come on, Steve, what are you doing? There's a company out here that's undercutting me by 15, 20%. You know, were you selling him at a special price?" I said, "No." And "Who is it?" And he said, "Well, it's this importer." So we found out who he was, and our attorneys wrote him a cease and desist letter, and he stopped. And then the guy down next to him started to do the same thing, and we stopped him, and then another guy started, and it became evident something was not working properly. We found out that Saisan, who the Japanese owner of the invention, had licensed a company in Taiwan. But I forgot to tell them that you can't sell this product into countries that have patents, though I don't think that would have made any difference anyhow. But we're now faced with this dilemma: what are we going to do? We can't just sue 20 companies. So the lawyer said, there is a way to prevent this. There's what's known as an exclusion order. If you have a patent, and you can go to the International Trade Commission and prevent any imports into the country, providing you go through a full court trial and you prove you have a valid patent, you prove the patent's infringed, you prove you're being damaged, and you prove you have an efficient operation. Expensive process going through this trial, but we really had no choice, so we said, okay, we'll do it, and what the hell, nobody is going to be opposing us. Wrong. One of the importers fought us tooth and nail. It was a 4-day trial. I remember being on the stand a day and a half. It wasn't a very pleasant experience, but in the end, we won. And we got the exclusion order, and no further infringing Minigrip bags, or the same as Ziploc, could come into the country. I often wondered, where did this importer get his money? It was a very expensive process, and he wasn't a huge company. We found out later that he never paid his lawyers. And he left them holding the bag, not our bag, but it was unfortunate because the lawyer was a decent guy and he lost his job on account of it. Anyhow, at this point in time, Dow comes on the market with a Ziploc bag. Big advertising campaign, and things I thought were going well when I get a call from the guys at Dow and they say, "Steve, you better come up to Midland, we have to talk to you." Well, I said, "Fine, great, maybe they want some additional license or something." And when I got there, they said, "Things are not going so well. I have to tell you that if things don't improve in a few months, we're going to have to kill the project." Well, that was a real letdown because we had really counted on the royalties from Dow and the exposure it would give us. But it turned out that somebody up there smiled on us because a couple of months later, the exact opposite happened. They called us and said, after you left, suddenly things took off, and things have taken off at such a rate, we can't meet the demand, and we want you to make these Ziploc bags for us. I said, "Great, what do you want?" So they said, we want 100 million bags. Well, that was when 1 million bags was a big order, 100 million bags. And we did it. We geared up for it, and it was a great experience for us. And one thing Dow really did for us, what the Ziploc bag did for us, it taught people how to open the bag. There is no one here today who doesn't know how to open a Ziploc bag. But that's thanks to their advertising and their promotion. And of course, it helped us sell the product too, because it became well known. Now things are going reasonably well, but things don't always stay well for long. You have to excuse me sometimes. I'm going back on 60 years of history, and sometimes I forget things. The next problem that arose was a little different in nature. It was a family problem. Now, as you know, you may not know, family problems are the worst. You know, when you start fighting within a family, it ends up badly. So basically, my attorney and my cousin's attorney and so on said, look, you guys are going to kill the business if you don't stop this. You have to sell it. So in 1978, we got hold of Goldman Sachs, who in those days was not the predatory company it's reputed to be today, and we asked them to find us a buyer. And they did. Within 6 months, they found a company called Signode. Signode makes metal and plastic strapping to hold products onto skids. They were the biggest in the United States. 2 or 3 smaller subsidiaries, and we fitted into their sort of subsidiary line. Usually, when a big company buys a small one, it can be a disaster, and often is, because the big company insists on forcing their culture onto the small company, and an entrepreneurial company doesn't work that way. But in Signode, it was exact opposite. 2 + 2 = 5, a symbiotic situation. They said, as long as you guys are doing as well as you are, we're not going to bother you. But if you need anything, engineering or personnel help or anything, just come to us and we'll help you. And that's exactly what happened. Because at that point in time, we also had started to realize that we had to get into the food prepackaging business. That's where the big volume was. But, you know, the same problem. There were quite a few machine companies that made what's known as a form, fill, and seal machine. That's a machine essentially that has a tube. You wrap the film around the tube, seal it, seal the bottom, put the product through the tube, seal the top, and you have a package, a food package. Of course, it's a more complex machine than just the simple way I described it. But they were not interested in putting zipper on their machine. They had their customers, they didn't want to be bothered. Things this time were different. We had the Signode engineering. And they bought one of these machines, and they figured out how to put the zipper on. We found a couple of customers, and we started to move ahead. We still had some smaller problems to solve. Well, the bag that came out of this machine had the zipper on the side. Most of the zipper bags in the food processing, the zipper is across, is on the top. So we had to try and find a way of doing that. I remember that Paul Christoph, one of their marketing people, said, well, okay, you know, Steve, you've got to do this. And I said, you can't. It's going in the wrong direction, across the machine direction. How can you do it? And he said, well, you figure it out. You can think of it. Well, I did, and so did a couple of the Signode engineers. So here again was a situation, well, can't be done, but it can be done. And with that, the business started to grow. And at that point in time, I had another thought. I thought, well, we're experts in the zipper business. Dow Chemical makes these barrier film. The films for food processing have to have a barrier. It has to be a complex film, consists of more than one layer. Why don't we form a company together and go about this together? So I floated the idea to the management of both, and they liked it. And out of this came a company called Ziploc, which is a new venture between Dow and Signode. And now we reach a point in time where we get into the, oh yes, one more thing. right before then, there was, a little before then, there was another problem that arose. Our product patent, that is a patent that covered the Ziploc bag, the construction, the zipper section of it, which is what we got our exclusion order, was going to run out. But we still had the method patents, i.e. the patents, the way you made the Ziploc bag, the way you got the tube and attached the locks to it and so on. So we thought, well, you know, can we get an exclusion order on those patents? They had another 5 years to go. Something not possible today. You can't get that kind of split between method and product. But anyhow, the trouble was, fine, we probably could get it, but how do we find out, how do we prove that they infringe? Well, it's method. Somebody's got to get into their factories. They've got to see what they're doing. We knew what they were doing because they got the technology from Saisan, the same as ours, but we had to prove it. The problem, these were companies in Taiwan, in South Korea, in Thailand, in Singapore. There were about 20 of them. Today there may be 100. We mulled it, how can we get somebody in there? You can't very well get somebody that doesn't know the business from locally, or we're not going to be able to get in. And then we had the idea, okay, we're going to write them a letter, and we're going to tell them, we know our product patent is running out. It's evident to us that we have to buy these bags, or a big chunk abroad, from you guys, because you can make them for much less. And we're prepared to do so, but obviously we have to know your quality is good, we have to know you have the ability to do it, and to do that we have to see your factory. Well, when we dangled that sort of carrot in front of them, the factories were all open to us. We went there, I went there with my attorney, we took notes, picked photographs, everything we needed. Went to the ITC again, had another hearing. This time there was no opposition, went smoothly. We got the exclusion order. We got another 5 years. By the time that ran out, of course, we were now into another level of packaging, which they could not compete in, but they did obviously compete on the Ziploc bag. Then we come up, as I said, to around 1987. At that time, Signode was acquired by ITW, Illinois Tool Works. Minigat was back, fully owned subsidiaries of ITW. And a year later, I retired at 65, and I was more or less done, but I stayed on as a consultant on intellectual property. So while I was not managing anymore, I had a fairly good idea of what was going on. And interestingly enough, it was in the ITW years, the years after 88, 89, that the real growth took place. Mind you, up to then, we had expanded twice in Orangeburg. We had built a plant in Texas, and that plant, following the acquisition of Signode, more than doubled, but the zipper business in Orangeburg kind of stagnated for a while. Then in the mid-90s, late 90s, it started to take off. And it took off spectacularly, and it increased from not at a smaller base by a factor of 25. In fact, at that point in time, or sooner or later, it was 3 times the size of the bag business. And I always remembered Otto's words when he's, of course, passed away long ago. He looks down and says, well, Steve, and I told you so. And he was right. The zipper business far exceeded the miniature bag business. There were when this growth of it took place, that meant that we had to expand, and we got new skilled people in engineering, in marketing, and so on, which formed the nucleus of now a much bigger team and much more effective team. And now, another thing changed. You didn't have to run to the machine bag, people who made foam fill seal machines or other machines that were used to fill food product, they were very ready to cooperate with you, and that made a big change. And I think there were about 90 of them now that worked with us. Before, if you recall, you couldn't get one of them to even look at us. So that was quite a change. And there are a few other, 2 or 3 other significant factors that happened. We found out soon after the acquisition we had a new competitor. And this was a company called Pactive. They were a throw-off of Tenneco. They had been working on this for a long time, and they came out with a slider zipper bag, which they were going to introduce into the packaging field and the consumer bag field in competition with Ziploc, the Ziploc bag. We saw it, and we said, well, slider, even though you could load it automatically now, it's not going to work. It's too expensive. And we were wrong again. It did work, and we've had to play catch-up since then, and especially as Pactive took a page out of our book, and they surrounded themselves with a forest of patents. The other event that happened is that the Dow Chemical Company decided they wanted to get out of anything that wasn't basic to their products. So they sold their share of the Zip Bag company to ITW, which became now fully owned by us, so to speak. And in fact, Dow got out of the Ziploc bag business altogether. Today it is owned by S.C. Johnson, not by Dow. And lastly, we had quite a bout of litigation with another company called AMI. It was an interesting company. They made foam seal machines. They made other zipper bag machines, and they made a thing called string zipper, was a different version of the zipper, much less expensive, and which is better for many uses. They started this litigation, and it continued for several years. And at one point, I guess they got tired of it, and they decided that they wanted to get out, and they sold their share, their company to Zip-Pak. So Zip-Pak now, on the one hand, had the wherewithal of not only their own machines, but building any machine that they might need for a special use. They had this zipper business well entrenched into the pre-packaged food bags. And they had, on the other hand, also the vinegar bag business, which had changed into where it was basically sold only to the large companies like Walmart. So now we get close to the present time, and we are at the position where from this 2 little strips of plastic that you press together, you have an industry which you include all the competitors, Ziploc bag, their competitors, the packaging food market, and all our competitors, an industry which is probably close to $2 billion. So, you know, from this little strip to $2 billion. And that pretty much brings me up to date. I just want to make a few more comments to some of you young entrepreneurs, and you've probably picked this up out of my speech, but number one, when you do your business plan, figure out your working capital, the cash you need, double it, because you never have enough. If you have to borrow money, try and avoid borrowing money from a bank, because if things go wrong, the bank will run your business. But if you do have to, never ever give a bank guarantee of your own, because if you do, in the bank, if things go wrong, they can come after your own assets. Now, if you have no assets, it doesn't matter, then you can give a guarantee. Two, any long-term contract should include an inflationary clause. Over a long period, that can really hurt if you don't have it. 3, don't think things can't be done. As you've seen, we had many times when people said it can't be done, and including myself, I thought it can't be done, and it could be done. So you can apply yourself and things can get done. Next, if you have a successful product, you're going to have competition. The more successful you are, the more likely you have the competition. And so don't sit on your laurels and be ready to fight. And remember, the Chinese companies are very adept at copying what we do, and they're quite good at it. And they usually come in at a lower price. And then be persistent. You know, as you saw from what took place in our case, and many times when you come to a point and you think you're at the end of the road, but you're not. You just have to fight it out, get through it, and you know, there's Murphy's Law that if something can go wrong, it will go wrong, and you'll encounter that, and you just have to overcome it. Another thought is, if you ever get into a point where you have one very large customer, they're taking 50 or 60%, 40% of your product line, try and avoid it, because that customer may at one point, and some well-known companies who've done this, will take advantage of the position, and before you know it, you're working for them, not for yourself. And one final word is, don't just think of internet and apps and things. There are many other possibilities out there. A cup of coffee, Starbucks. Okay, well, thank you, and go market.